The Raven's rise to power in Edenvale was swift. After his official marriage to Phelan, the Dragon Empress, the Raven Lord's influence in the surrounding provinces only grew. Various other races, towns, cities, and villages all turned to the banner of the Raven Lord and his goal of rebuilding Tigarea. Phelan, loyal and devoted to the Raven Lord, longed to aid him in his quest and used her dragons to maintain protection and control of the borders of their growing empire. However, the Raven was aware that growing this empire would not be a simple affair, and there would be greater and more destructive conflicts. His armies needed equipment, gear, weapons. He had access to some of the finest dwarven smithies in the region and provinces, but he knew that they would require more. Raven had heard rumors of an artificier and alchemist on the fringe edges of his territory, renowned for his work with metal and constructs, known as the Lark. At the time this was taking place, the Lark was in a territory called Etcroft, run by a local duke named Duke Ulrich. Ulrich had commissioned the Lark to forge for his personal guard and himself the most fine armor he could craft, which would artificially enhance strength, durability, and be lightweight. A tall order, and Lark was still considering a price for these creations. But over the weeks he worked, he became familiar with the castle of Ulrich, and he met a woman whose striking beauty took Lark by surprise. She was a half-elf, and though Lark asked her numerous times for her name, she always evaded the question. Careful deduction led Lark to finally surmise she was the daughter to the Duke. Lark finally approached the Duke with his gift, and said he would offer these freely in exchange for the Duke's daughter in marriage. The Duke was shocked, claiming he had no daughter, but when Lark mentioned the beautiful half-elf woman he'd met, it sent the Duke into a rage. As it turned out, the woman, Arabella, was in fact the Duke's illegitimate daughter from a private affair, one he'd wanted to keep hidden. Furious at Lark for uncovering his infidelity, he attacked him and expelled him from his province. Lark was beside himself with anger and regret. He paid a small mercenary band and armed himself with some of his own weapons and arms, and while he prepared to leave and engage in battle for Arabella, that was when a messenger from the Raven Lord arrived to speak with him. However, he was unwilling to hear the wants or needs of some upstart warlord with delusions of grandeur. Lark turned the messenger away and went on to battle. But the battle was a rout. The mercenary saw the strength of Ulrich's men and the exemplary armor that he wore, and turned to flee. Lark was left at the mercy of the Duke, and was dragged before him. There Ulrich praised the Lark for his magnificent armor and weapons that he'd made for him, and his soldiers. In fact, he now wanted Lark as his own personal artificier to continue crafting fine weaponry and armor for him. Lark at first refused the offer, demanding only for the release of Arabella. And it was then that Ulrich brought his daughter before Lark, weeping and with her face half scarred by fire, so that she would never be recognized as the daughter of Ulrich again. Ulrich explained that he would continue torturing her if Lark refused again. Before Lark could agree to the terms, the palace of Ulrich was assailed again, but this time by the Raven Lord. Ulrich knew of the Raven Lord, but believed that with his new armor and weaponry, he was more than a match for the upstart ruler of Tigarea. Ulrich and his guard attempted to use the very arms and weapons of the Lark to subdue him, but they were no match for the power of the Tartarus Eye, which he used to rend Ulrich and all of his men asunder. He left Ulrich alive and at Lark's mercy, and began working to subjugate the entire province of Etcroft under his banner, to add it to the empire of Tigarea once again. He then left so Lark could see to Arabella, his love. 2 weeks after the defeat of Ulrich, Lark reappeared in the Raven's castle in Edenvale, prostrating himself and kneeling before the Raven Lord. He then offered his services to the Raven as his advisor and artificier on 3 conditions. First was that Ulrich be sentenced to death by burning at the stake. The second was that Raven would allow him to take Arabella as his bride. The third was that he be allowed to move his workshop and forge to Edenvale. The Raven Lord agreed to all the conditions offered. Ulrich was executed the next day for his crimes. Arabella and Lark were wed the following week, and Lark, out of love for Arabella, subjected his own face to the same burns as his wife, so that she would not feel unwanted or unloved by him. They both went to donning masks to hide their faces, but not because of shame, but because both wanted to know the other without knowing faces. 3 months later, the Lark's Forge was established in Edenvale. News spread around the surrounding provinces that the Lark, the famous artificer and smith, had allied himself to the Raven Lord. This news led to a positive daimyo effect of various smaller factions, regions, and 3 provinces pledging loyalty to the Raven Lord. Tigeria was now expanding to a level not seen since the collapse of the Empire so long ago after the Tigerian interregnum. By year's end, the old capital of Tigeria, held by the dwarf lord Bolden, would be conquered and reclaimed by the Raven, and Tigeria would again be rebuilt. The Lark began work immediately to arm Raven's forces with armor, weapons, and machines of war that could put even the great dwarven factories to shame. He instructed and educated the other smiths and architects of Edenvale in his secrets of the arcane and in metalwork. By the time the Raven's forces engaged Bolden's defenses, the Raven's armies were now more equipped and more powerful than before. The walls of Tigeria fell in just 4 hours of the initial bombardment, and with their collapse, the armies of the Raven stormed the city. Bolden brought forward defensive mortars and powerful weapons that spewed flames at the attacking Edenvale army. But the armor of the Lark was impervious to the heat of the fire, and the swift mobility of the military, despite their armor, allowed them to evade the destructive artillery. The battle began in the early hours of the morning, and by the time the sun was setting on the horizon, Bolden was on his knees before the Raven Lord, and he was being offered immediate and unconditional surrender. A battle that may have taken days before now only took a single one to complete, and it was thanks in large part to the ingenuity of the Lark. Raven could not have been more thrilled, and with the fall of Bolden, Tigeria's capital and surrounding territories were now his. Tigeria had once again regained its territory, and was finally recognized as the empire it used to be. And just in time, as the Osmod Sultanate had learned of the return of Tigeria and the power of this mysterious Raven Lord. Daggeroth, the Harbinger of Darkness, was more than a little keen on this news. Could this Raven Lord possess powers similar to his own? And if so, could he be the secret link to achieving his ambitions? Only 1 year after Tigeria was restored, the Osmod machine began its march towards her borders, and with their approach would begin the most decisive war of the Second Age of Tigeria, as well as a clashing of the Raven and Daggeroth. A clash and battle which would shake reality itself.